I used to be a drug addict. Every weekend I'd hook up with a group of friends, we'd phone our drug dealer, wait for him to arrive on his bike and buy ecstasy, and whatever else he had at the time. We'd then head up to my friend's flat, get high and dance the night away. I felt invincible, like the world couldn't touch me whilst my life slowly began to descend around me as I devoted my entire life around the next weekend and my next fix. Anyone who wasn't involved with the drugs didn't understand and simply wasn't worth my time. It was both the best and worst time of my life, and after struggling to get clean, looking back I wouldn't change any of it, given it's made me who I am today. With this in mind then, it's always tricky to watch shows that depict drug addicts, having been through that myself. HBO's latest teen drama Euphoria is an unfiltered sex and drug-fueled look at the lives of several teenagers that both excels and falters in equal doses to deliver an uneven pilot that can't quite decide who it wants to appeal to or what message it wants to share. Narrated by main character Rue Bennett, the show begins with a look at her past life and descent into depression, with an increasing reliance on drugs and alcohol as she reaches her teenage years. The summer before junior year was spent in rehab, but she had no intention of staying clean. After getting out, Rue then continues to do drugs before we cut out and follow Nate as he drives along, taunting a girl on a bike, who happens to be another character we're following this year called Jules. Jules happens to live in the suburbs but is new to the neighborhood, finding solace in her friend Kat, whom she texts after trying to find a hookup with a stranger for the night on her phone. Her text to Kat then jumps perspectives to a group of girls, one of which being Nate's ex, as they prepare for the upcoming party. From here, we then jump back to Rue again as she arrives home late with her mum berating her for leaving. She's forced to do a urine test to prove she's clean, but before she does, she heads to her friend's house to get a fresh sample. Jules then hooks up with a married man who we learn the true identity of later in the episode, while Nate starts his party. A group of topless guys huddle around Chris McKay's phone, sharing nudes of a girl called Cassie, which causes him to feel uncomfortable and awkward. Later that night though, he hooks up with Cassie and things get heavy, leading to him becoming rough and choking her, a nod toward one of the themes of the episode around substituting intimate sex for imitating porn. As we jump back to Rue, we see her taking drugs before stumbling out into the hallway. In one of the most iconic and gorgeous shots on TV this year, we see the hallway rotate in a full 360-degree angle while she scrambles up the walls and ceiling before touching the ground again. She stumbles downstairs, but the camera defiantly steers away from her, traveling into a room with Kat and three boys smoking weed. Struggling to fight against peer pressure and ridicule, she tells the boys she's not a virgin, and she's pressured into taking her top off. Nate then calls off the party upon seeing his ex hooking up with someone else, but when he enters the kitchen again, he sees Jules, whom he takes his frustration out on. He questions why she's there and threatens her, prompting her to antagonize him with a knife before rushing out, where she comes face to face with Rue. They head home together while we see our main characters sleep. Aside from the message that drugs tear families apart, there isn't a whole lot to really cling to here. Despite the episode gravitating around Rue and her drug addiction, I'd actually argue this was the weakest part of the pilot. This descent into chaos was much better depicted in the feature film 13, and to me, Zendaya doesn't quite nail the right level needed to showcase her as an addict. There isn't much to the story this early on either, but the way we cut across to the various characters, although initially messy and unpredictable, is actually unique and really fits in nicely with the design of the show. The production and sets throughout the episode are top-notch too, with gorgeous cinematography typified by the stunning rotating shot mentioned earlier. Euphoria then is really a show of two halves. Whilst visually stunning, the show lacks the big hook to keep you invested in this one for the long term, but there's just enough intrigue to keep you coming back to find out what happens next. The show is really nicely shot too, and the pilot does just enough to introduce the characters and end things on a suitably intriguing note to keep you coming back to find out what happens. It's not perfect, but the foundation is here for the story to kick into high gear and deliver something really memorable. Whether it will or not, remains to Euphoria returns with a much more driven focus, doubling down on its drama to deliver a surprisingly tense and engrossing hour of artistic teen character building. While messages around porn and its damaging effect on youth still play heavily over parts of the show, Rue's peer pressure when being faced with drugs and her damaged family life as a result of this are surprisingly effective in keeping everything tied together cohesively, much more so than the first episode did. We begin by seeing a little boy watching his dad's homemade porn movies. This little boy slowly becomes driven to perfect his body, growing up to become the jock we met in the pilot episode, Nate. With a fair amount of male frontal nudity, we see his college football life and blossoming relationship with Maddie over a slickly produced montage piece. We then cut back to see Rue and Jules begin to hit it off together. As school picks up again after the summer, Rue is forced up on stage to talk about what she's been up to during the break. The break she spent predominantly in rehab. After fumbling her words a little, she picks out one memory that starts well enough, singing a song in a car which quickly devolves into a drug-fueled angry outburst at home, over the words of Bobby Womack's "Fly Me to the Moon." Kat then receives a text that causes her chest to tighten. It turns out when she lost her virginity, it was recorded and put up for the world to see. She confronts the boys who uploaded it, threatening to go to the police given she's still a minor, so the story is then changed. This leads Kat into the principal's office where he asks her if she's the girl from the videos. She accuses him of body shaming, which makes him backpedal and promise to do everything in his power to find the culprit. Nate, meanwhile, tries to patch things up with Maddie, offering to take her out on a date, while Jules and Rue grow closer together. However, things get heavy when Fez invites a dangerous man called Mouse into the house, while Rue is there scoring drugs. With a gun stuffed down the side of the sofa, Fez watches cautiously as the man offers her fentanyl, a powerful quick-hitting drug. Things get pretty intense, and the room silences to a hush as they await what Rue will do next. She prays to the heavens above to let her survive, and she takes the drug. On the warpath, Nate heads to the house of the guy who slept with Maddie, and accuses him of raping a minor. Nate threatens him, telling him to get on his knees before beating him repeatedly in a bid to beat a confession out of him. Crying and whimpering, the boy refuses to admit to it. After beating him to a pulp, Nate casually helps himself to a shower before putting his clothes back on and heading to Maddie's where he taunts her. After screwing her in an alleyway, he gives Maddie a present, an unflattering pink dress. Meanwhile, Rue begins to black out and, without the money to pay for her high, Mouse looks to take advantage of her until Fez steps in to pay. Unfortunately, he charges him double, a small price to pay than allowing Rue to being screwed over. After Mouse leaves, Rue takes a turn for the worst, prompting Jules to help Fez drive her to her place where she engages in a conversation with Shy Guy over text. Here, we find out his name is really Tyler. Much improved from the first episode, Euphoria finally feels like it's found its purpose here, delivering the right level of tension and teen angst to make it a surprisingly effective drama. While the amount of male genitalia in the first 10 minutes was a little left field and something I certainly didn't see coming, it's an interesting stylistic choice nonetheless, and one that gets its message across in a relatively artistic. To me at least, this segment felt like a reflection of Nate's sexual upbringing, having seen his father engage in pornography online. It highlights his detachment and how he views others in a stereotypical, resentful sexual manner. This idea also plays into his conversation with Maddie late on when he asks about the sexual encounter with the boy he beat up. Maybe that's a bit of a stretch, but next to Nate's journey, some of Rue's material this episode brought back some pretty uncomfortable home truths. Seeing Rue in a room, peer pressured into trying new drugs, and seeing her hitting out at her family are pretty realistic, and, speaking from experience, certainly nail the right level of shock and drama. Drugs can give you the best feelings in the world. Some of my fondest memories are from parties where I dropped ecstasy and spent the night listening to Gatecrasher classics on repeat until we all hit an almighty come down. It could also be an alien, horrible experience, returning home to my mundane family life and resenting them for looking at me with disappointment, given the dark rings around my eyes and instinctive grinding teeth. This side of Euphoria is what I really admire the most about the show. These little shades of gray, to show the good and bad side of taking drugs, is really nicely written and very much appreciated. The soundtrack to the show is surprisingly good too, drawing on a wide pool of genres and ending with a suitably fitting montage segment with Mount Everest by Labyrinth. It's not the best drama released, but it is one of 2019's more unusual, artistic, and interesting shows, one that finally feels like it's found the right groove to settle on. Episode 3 of Euphoria. HBO's stylish teen drama returns with another visually impressive episode, one that asks big questions around this new digitalized age of love. With text conversations between multiple duos dominating proceedings this week, Euphoria continues to match up its gorgeous visuals with a thematically strong narrative. We begin with an introduction to Kat's past. Her childhood, weight gain and loss of her first boyfriend Anil act as the catalyst for what follows from there. We see her rise to the top of Tumblr, courtesy of her erotic fiction, before bringing us right back to the recent uploaded sex video. Determined to ride this wave of newfound internet fame, she dons a mask and twerks in the doorway, recording it for a porn site. We return to Rue this week, who decides to stay clean off drugs for a while. Not 60 days as the rehab center would believe, but clean nonetheless. While she grows closer to Jules, her best friend starts falling in love via text with shy guy who happens to be Nate in real life. From here, Euphoria boasts a beautiful split screen shot of their text conversation as they continue to fall deeper into conversation together. They're not the only ones having text conversations either, as Kat starts talking to a guy online who's willing to pay her for a Skype session. Unsure how wiring money works, she heads off to ask Fez for advice on the matter. Rue continues to feel conflicted over her feelings toward Jules, and on her way out her house, she steals some narcotics and throws away 2 weeks of rehab for a quick fix. However, she comes across a man named Ali on her way home, who speaks some home truths about being clean and lying, prompting Rue to head home and spend time with her sister. Meanwhile, Maddie prepares for her night with Nate, and after screwing around together, she checks Nate's phone while he's in the shower, and, after a fruitless search through his messages, comes across an abundance of pictures of his penis. With renowned confidence following her Skype conversation with the strange internet guy, Kat dons a new appearance and rocks up at school a changed girl. While she continues to turn heads, Rue has a heart-to-heart with Jules, ending with her leaning forward and kissing her before running out the room in shock. Unable to deal with her feelings, Rue heads to Fez's for a fix, but he refuses to give her any more drugs after the incident last week. The episode then ends with Rue phoning Ali, finally ready to properly be clean off the drugs. While not quite as hard-hitting as last week, Euphoria's latest episode asks big questions around love and about how we experience this through digital conversations. With plenty of text conversations and a continued narrative playing on the idea of porn and how this distorts our perception of love, Euphoria does a good job advancing each of our main characters, whilst keeping this idea a central focus of the show. Of course, stylistically Euphoria continues to shine, with a few really slick camera shots laid on. There is a fair amount of explicit content again this week, and for those not prepared, it's worth pointing this out as Euphoria is not shy when it comes to male genitalia. While there isn't anything wrong with this, of course, this week it feels placed for shocks rather than a genuine thematic purpose. Euphoria continues to deliver an enjoyable teen drama nonetheless, and in true HBO fashion, the story progresses with a good pacing, with a continued reliance on the gorgeous visuals to drive the characters forward. Whilst not quite as impressive as previous episode, there's enough here to make Euphoria one of the more stylish shows out there right. Episode 4 Euphoria. We return to Euphoria for one of the most stylish episodes of TV this year. From the effortless switches between characters during one-shot dolly movements to a masterful use of color to paint a neon-lit picture, Euphoria waltzes its way back onto screens for a visual and audio treat. We begin with a look at Jules' past, which happens to be more troubling than Nate's. As a child, she was tricked into staying in a psychiatric ward by her mum. A gorgeous shot involving blurred imagery in the corners of the frame follows, where we see Jules' body image problems beginning. This unfortunately leads to her finding solace in cutting, before we see her age through the years, eventually catching us up to where we are now, with Jules in love and Rue by her side as her friend. As we cut back to present day, we find Ollie and Rue discussing how she feels, and he likens it to a drug addiction, given her obsession with Jules. We then cut forward to the fairground, where all of our characters are hanging out, with an impressive one-shot scene that effortlessly moves between each of the teenagers. Nate laments Maddie's provocative outfit, Kat screaming on the Ferris wheel, while in the distance, Fez sets up shop. Nate tells Maddie to go home and get changed while the camera swings wildly across to Rue and Jules, who lock eyes and run up to one another, embracing in a long hug. Jules tells her things aren't weird between them despite the kiss, and Rue breathes a deep sigh of relief. Meanwhile, Cassie feels humiliated when McKay tells Nate's dad they're not dating, but he tries to explain to her why he said that. In the end, they go their separate ways, which throws Cassie into the path of Maddie, and the two decide to do MDMA together. Jules tells Rue that Nate's dad is the man she's been sleeping with, which is met with an incredulous laugh from her best friend. Rue doesn't believe her, of course, until Jules approaches the chili stand he's working at and things get awkward. As the two then discuss the night's events, Rue receives a phone call from her mum, and it turns out Gia isn't answering her phone. As classical big band music dominates the audio channels, Rue and Jules rush around the crowded fairground to try and find Rue's little sister. Fireworks illuminate the sky, while Cassie winds up cheating on McKay with a boy on the merry-go-round. Maddie meanwhile confronts Nate over the pictures on his phone. Rue eventually finds Gia hanging out with a group of guys and smoking weed. Seeing her become a mirror image of Rue at that age is a harsh reminder of how damaging drugs can be on a family unit, and Rue immediately senses this. She texts Jules to let her know her sister is safe, and as she receives the message, Nate's dad arrives and pleads with her not to ruin his life. She agrees and tells him she's not like that, much to his relief. While Rue and Gia head home together, Jules meets up with Tyler for the first time. Of course, Tyler happens to be Nate, and their meeting is a little awkward to say the least. This quickly turns hostile when Jules rejects him, and Nate threatens a child pornography lawsuit against her. She stands her ground though, throwing back an insult involving Nate's dad, whom she's been sleeping with. As their meeting turns sour, Jules heads over to Rue's for a sleepover and, after telling her the incident with Tyler was a flop, they embrace and start kissing. A stylish, horizontally rotating shot then ensues, showing Rue and Jules finally together. While the episode itself doesn't feature much in the way of unique plot progression, with both Kat's turmoil and Rue's drug addiction taking a back seat here, Euphoria showcases some of the most unique, stylish camera work of the year. From the 360-degree camera shots to the exquisite framing throughout, every moment of Euphoria's hour-long episode is a real visual treat. There's been teasing glimpses across the first 3 episodes of characters seamlessly shifting with the camera, but here the isolated setting of the carnival really helps to ground this into one area. Rue does take somewhat of a backseat this episode, despite her initial concerns over younger sister Gia, and this allows Jules to take center stage. It's a smart move too, and one that really does well to add some emotional weight when the inevitable hammer blow at the end strikes. It may not have the most unique story, and at times it does fall into the usual angst cliches you'd expect from this genre, but the aesthetic treat is enough to elevate this episode into one of the best. Episode 5 of Euphoria takes us on a thought-provoking journey through the various teen relationships occupying the show, with the focus predominantly on Maddie. We begin by seeing her pass from the glitzy beauty peeking through to her toxic relationship with Nate. It turns out she wasn't a virgin after all, and is actually quite the manipulator. As Rue narrates these scenes, we catch up to present day where Maddie was choked by Nate at the carnival. After this brief prologue, we begin with Rue missing drugs, but as a second prize she focuses on Jules instead, almost obsessively. As she begins to pleasure herself, Rue's mum bursts in, causing a slightly awkward and strangely humorous exchange between them to occur. Things appears to be on the up for Rue with her mum, and their relationship is finally beginning to rekindle without the wall of drugs between them. Unable to hide the raw red marks across her neck, Maddie is eventually found out at school. Given her Molly incident at the carnival and inability to eat thanks to her come-down, at school she's called into the principal's office, where she's asked if Nate is the one responsible. Maddie doesn't crack, but he's determined, proceeding to quiz various kids around campus before calling Nate and his father into the office. The night of the carnival saw Kat have an epiphany about men, prompting her confidence to skyrocket. An interesting bit of juxtaposing imagery follows as Kat stands next to a shop with a Calvin Harris model poster on. However, she's still angry at Ethan for what he did, so she hooks up with a random guy, leading to an intimate encounter in his car. Maddie's mother decides to press charges, much to the horror of her daughter. Cal, meanwhile, is told to speak to his son before doing anything else. He tells Nate to keep his head held high and not to pay attention to the people around him as he's marched out of school and into the local police station. Maddie is taken down to the station as well, where she squares up to one of the officers after throwing a milkshake before having her hoodie forcibly removed. We see the pictures of her neck in high definition. It's not pretty. In a room next door, Nate is interviewed where he tells her he grabbed her by the arm but didn't choke her. He does tell the police she was high on MDMA though, but it's not enough to prevent Nate from being suspended. Juxtaposing Maddie's sexual history, we see Rue's self-confessed brief and embarrassing hookups with a lack of meaningful emotion. Besides what she's feeling with Jules, she's never been in love. After a good talk with Ollie at the rehab center about it, Rue admits the real truth to everyone in the group. She wasn't clean all those times she said she was. It's actually been 13 days. However, Jules is the one who's really helped her through this time. Later that night, Rue and Jules head to the roller disco together, but as her friend comments on Rue's euphoric mood, Jules freaks out and heads to the toilets. Cal heads back to the familiar hookup spot at the motel, but midway through his time with a random guy, he has second thoughts. He talks to him about the rage his boys are feeling and how scared he is they'll follow in his footsteps, wondering whether what he's doing affects them. While out driving, Maddie receives a text from Nate telling her to meet him at the hotel off exit 27. Hopeful, she speeds up toward the rendezvous point, where we ironically find out it's the same hotel Cal left moments earlier. Nate and Maddie then meet and embrace, while Rue falls asleep on a terrified Jules. Euphoria continues to deliver decent characterization wrapped up with thought PR0-evoking ideas. This week it's all about juxtapositions, and this idea is flirted with throughout the 50-minute episode. From Kat comfortable in her own skin next to posters of skinny models, or Rue's lack of passion compared to Maddie's adventurous sex life, all of these ideas poetically bounce around the different characters. While the style this week continues to deliver in true Euphoria fashion, the narrative itself is what takes center stage here. Seeing the cracks begin to form in Rue and Jules' relationship feels like it could spell disaster for Rue's rehab later on down the line too. However, all the characters are given an equal amount of screen time here, and it's partly why Euphoria works as well as it does. Euphoria delivers another very good episode this week, one that offers enough substance with the plot, whilst pushing some thought-provoking questions around relationships in the process. Out of all the teen dramas released this year, Euphoria has been the most impressive. Quite where the show will go from here remains to be seen, but in the meantime, Euphoria offers one of its most interesting episodes of Episode 6 of Euphoria returns with a more straightforward story, one that ditches some of the impressive editing and stylistic tics for a much deeper dive into the main plotline of the show. It works reasonably well too, with an intentionally disorientating sense of time added to try and keep up the same flair and style seen in the show up until this point. This time around, we begin with a look at McKay's intense pressure from his father during his upbringing. This leads to him on the cusp of going pro in football, but ultimately missing out due to falling in love with Cassie and doing the math on his odds of actually making it into the NFL. However, tensions brew as McKay has issues with the way Cassie dresses, which opens up a rift between them that only seems to be growing. Meanwhile, Kat starts webcaming properly and making a good amount of money from it. Ironically, she heads to the Halloween party dressed as an nun, while Rue feels left out as the only sober one, sensing that something is off with Jules. The way she conveys this sickening knot in her stomach is really well written, and throughout the episode we see through her sober lens the damage this is doing her. With Nate's reputation completely shattered, he finds solace in Maddie, hooking up with her while keeping an eye on everyone else from a distance. He then continues his crusade to besmirch Jules' reputation by printing out topless photos which he later uses to blackmail her. Back at the party, Rue patches things up with Fezco, but all eyes are on Cassie as she starts dancing with the boy from the carnival. Her and McKay's relationship is in a strange place, and via flashback we see him jumped by his roommates midway through having sex with Cassie, thrown on the floor and humiliated. As he uncontrollably sobs in the bathroom, Cassie texts Lexi and tells her what's happened. Compassing himself, McKay arrives from the bathroom again, but this time the romance is all but gone between him, and they engage in an uncomfortable and hard-to-watch sex scene. We jump back to present day soon after where Cassie takes the boy upstairs and things begin getting heavy, just as McKay walks in the front door to the party. Dressed as an angel, Jules stumbles outside and falls in the pool, prompting Rue to go and save her. She spouts out lines from Romeo and Juliet, while Cassie has second thoughts about cheating on McKay. As she refuses his advances, he throws down some seriously harsh words, telling her she's not interesting, and wishes her good luck with her boyfriend. A musical montage then kicks in as we see all our characters in various emotional states, before seeing Nate head to Tyler's to give him a proposition. He's going to confess to choking Maddie, and to make matters worse for him, Jules is in on the act too to give this statement some depth. Given she has incriminating photos held against her, Jules doesn't have much of a choice, despite the policewoman telling her false evidence could lead to 7 years in prison. As it happens, this incident with the police and Tyler actually happened prior to the Halloween party, as Nate shows up with Maddie, much to the disdain of Jules, who looks on from a distance. Unlike the opening episodes that really doubled down on the damaged drugs due to a family and allowing everything else to spiral around this plot point, Euphoria really settles into a more familiar and rigid high school drama format, now that Rue is sober. With the characters already established, there's certainly a good amount of tension, and the episode itself has some really nice moments, especially the rising tension around Nate's ordeal. While the latest episode doesn't quite hit the same lofty artistic heights others have in this series, with a distinct lack of impressive camera movements and stylistic tics, Euphoria feels much more akin to other shows in this genre. Still, when it comes to plot progression, Euphoria certainly moves things forward and delivers another highly enjoyable episode, with an even better soundtrack to boot. Quite where this one is likely to go next remains to be seen, but HBO's teen drama has been a thoroughly enjoyable watch over the weeks, and that doesn't look like changing anytime. Episode 7 of Euphoria. As we reach the business end of HBO's teen drama, Euphoria begins with a look at Cassie's childhood. Her potential rise to ice skating fame fizzles out thanks to financial issues with her father, before we see Cass grow into a teenager. Here, we see her good looks change everyone's perceptions of her. Family relations begin to break down, and her father falls off the wagon. This catches us up with present-day Cassie, who takes a pregnancy test and stares into space, shocked. She's pregnant. Tyler Clarkson is imprisoned for what happened to Maddie, while Rue goes on a mission to find out exactly what happened, sensing there's more to the tale than meets the eye. Rue pieces together the clues and begins making some calls in a nice throwback to old detective thrillers. She smokes a cigarette and surrounds herself in pictures, figuring out about Jules and ironically finding herself riding a natural high because of it. Cassie tells the other girls that she's going to confess everything that happened with Daniel to McKay. Maddie tells her not to while Kat chimes in by grilling Maddie about Nate. She curses Kat and laments her new attitude, prompting her to leave, crying. Cassie asks Lex what she would do, and her sister advises her not to say anything. Rue has trouble adjusting to her mom's new boyfriend, and after a pretty awkward conversation between the two, Jules and Rue's relationship continues to sour, while Rue watches an obscene amount of Love Island. After visiting Fezco, she has hallucinations around the drugs laid out on the side, asking her to eat them. She manages to resist temptation though, but instead falls into a suffocating, endless loop of depression. Meanwhile, Jules gets on a bus and heads off to see old friends. Singing in a car, she hangs out the sunroof completely carefree. As the camera swings smoothly around, Jules meets another friend, and they put on makeup together while discussing their lives. High as a kite, Jules debates whether to text Rue before kissing a girl in the club, all the while cutting back to Rue, who continues to have issues with her kidneys. Nate arrives soon after and apologizes to Jules for everything. However, as the two begin kissing, it's here where we realize Jules is simply hallucinating, and it's actually the same girl as before. As she comes down from her high, she looks on with regret. Cass does eventually tell McKay she's pregnant, and the two discuss the ramifications of this on their future, while Kat has an uneasy webcam conversation with someone using a black screen and a voice distorter. Nate and Maddie then show up at the petrol station Fezco works at. He asks Nate to stop going after Rue and squares up to him, prompting Nate to set his sights on the drug dealer. Unblinking, Fezco tells him if he keeps messing with Rue and her friends, he'll kill him. However, later that evening the police get a tip-off from Nate to arrive at Fezco's while he and Mouse do their best to flush all their gear. The episode then ends with all our characters taking a proverbial deep breath as next week's finale looms on the horizon. After 7 episodes, Euphoria has twisted and turned its way through various melodramatic subplots and interesting developments. Rue's character continues to be the one whom the drama revolves around, with her early episodes as a drug addict replaced by a different kind of addiction throughout the episodes. It's pretty accurate too, if I'm honest, and speaking from my own experience, I threw myself into writing and video games, including a particularly memorable 22-hour session on Fallout 3, to get my mind off the drugs. This is the side of drug addiction you rarely see on TV, and I'm glad Euphoria have chosen to depict it in this manner. Rehab is a long, exhausting road, and there will be pitfalls and temptations along the way. It's not as simple as throwing up a little and getting clean. Those mental tics and neurological changes to your brain need time to rewire. Seeing Rue's kidney problems really typify this, and between her obsession with Jules and the 22-episode Love Island binges, those addictive tendencies are still there to see in all their ugly glory. The rest of this teen drama is still interesting, of course, and the melodramatic bubble looks set to burst next week during Euphoria's finale. I do hope this one is renewed for a second season, but if not, there's enough here to make for a solid standalone show nonetheless. Whether Nate will get his comeuppance remains to be seen, but for now, Euphoria continues to deliver the goods with another well-written slice of tea. Euphoria's finale is a pretty accurate reflection of life. It's chaotic, confusing, and structurally uneven as our characters stumble through their storylines to the other side, for better or for worse. It's almost certainly going to be one of the most polarizing finales of the year too, as HBO's latest drama does its best to wrap up as many character plots as possible, whilst leaving just enough open for a potential second season. In a way, it just about achieved this, although some frustrating plot inconsistencies and a tendency for style over substance holds this back from being the explosive finish it so easily could have been. Instead of the usual narration introducing the history of one key character, Euphoria begins right at the heart of the drama, following Rue as she tackles her kidney infection. She refuses to take Vicodin and blissfully revels in the lack of responsibilities she has in hospital while recovering. Life is good. Of course, this is fleeting at best as Rue is sucked back into her teen angst, as Jules tells her about her time away, and they both curse Nate Jacobs together. It's the night of the winter formal at school, and most of the teens prepare excitedly for the big night. We see each of them getting dressed up at home, including Fezco, who dons a hooded jacket and eyes himself in the mirror before leaving with a loaded gun. Beautifully poetic narration from Rue's mum colors this portion of the episode too, discussing symmetry and balance as we cut, presumably, forward in time. It's the perfect recipe for what happens next, but also sees the episode's structure become unhinged the deeper down the rabbit hole we go. Maddie and Nate continue to experience issues in their volatile relationship, dancing with other people, only to find solace in their own crazed ideas of love. These two feel destined to be with one another, finding a strange addiction in their own chaos. In the midst of all this romantic angst, one good thing does come from the finale. Kat finally comes clean to Ethan about how she feels. They decide to leave together while Cassie and Lex wish them the best. This happens to be the eye of the storm for the episode, as everything around it spins out of control. Rue catches up with Nate soon after and threatens him, telling him he can mess up his life, but Nate bites back, telling him she doesn't know everything about wild child Jules. Nate knows exactly how to hit her where it hurts, though, digging into her own insecurities around her best friend and lover. This inevitably leads Rue and Jules to talk, as she asks whether she's in love before deciding to leave town together. As the episode reaches its crescendo, we cut between various characters as they hit breaking point. Cassie has an abortion, Rue and Jules tell each other how they really feel, while Fezco robs a high-ranking official. As he stacks wads of cash into a bag, unbeknownst to him the man's son watches on from the hallway. It turns out the robbery was essentially a play to square things with his dealer before ending in bloodshed. Before Jules and Rue can leave town, Rue has second thoughts, deciding this isn't the life for her. She says her goodbyes and watches as the train leaves the station, both metaphorically and physically. After her stint with drugs, everything appears to be coming into perspective for Rue, and one final montage sees her understand the damage her drug addiction has had on her family. However, this happens to be a double bluff, as the final scene of the episode sees Rue return to a life of drugs, beginning her slippery slope all over again. Euphoria's first season has been a wild, tumultuous ride. At times the narrative has teetered close to careering off track, and the series has definitely valued its stylish visuals and aesthetic over narrative consistency. Having said that, the first season has managed to do well in conveying its thought-provoking messages. Substance abuse and teen love are the main themes here, and both are showcased to go hand in hand. It's a cleverly written idea too that love can be as destructive and powerful as drug addiction, and for the most part the series does well depicting this. While some may lament the open ending and outright weirdness of the finale, I personally feel like the unhinged, chaotic and unstructured way this is depicted works well to reflect our own lives. A lot of us just stumble through life with no direction, going with the flow, and in many ways Euphoria showcases just that. With the exception of perhaps Kat, Cassie and Rue, the other characters don't really get much of a send-off here though, which is a little disappointing. I predicted weeks ago that Rue would turn back to drugs when Jules leaves, but actually seeing this happen no less softens the blow. Whether this will return for a second season remains to be seen, but given the UK have picked this up to run on Sky Atlantic, a global audience can only mean more people get to experience this beautifully written show. It's not perfect, and the ending does leave things open for more, but there's enough here to make for an enjoyable finale nonetheless, weirdness and all. HBO's recent teen drama Euphoria is a stylish, well-written and oftentimes chaotic series. From its bold use of nudity and drug use through to its dizzying array of aesthetically pleasing scenes, Euphoria is as engrossing as it is beautiful. At times it does value style over substance, especially during the season's finale, but for the most part this teen drama does well to keep things interesting and absorbing until the end. The story predominantly revolves around high school student Rue. Addicted to drugs and spiraling out of control, her whirlwind of familial drama and addiction ultimately acts as the catalyst to which everyone else dances around with their own angst. High school jock Nate plays a dangerous game with teen sweetheart Maddie, while wild child Jules mellows Rue out as the season progresses. Kat goes through a pretty dramatic transformation as the episodes tick by too, while McKay and Cassie find out the hard way that teen romance isn't all it's shaped up to be. Despite how tumultuous the children are, it's ironically the parents that cause more damage than their children. Seeing Nate's dad losing control or seeing Cassie's mom reaching for one more glass really hammers home how much of an influence the parents have over their own kids. Ultimately though, it's Rue's drug addiction that takes center stage here, and although some of the later episodes do soften the impact of this, the angst is well written and develops well over the episodes. While the story itself dips and peaks throughout its 8-episode run, the overall style and tone is consistent throughout. Technically at least, Euphoria is as impressive as it is stylish, with numerous slick camera movements and smart edits peppered throughout the show. From sharp cuts back and forth through time to rotating camera movements that work harmoniously with the deliberate choice of hedonistic color, Euphoria is a beautiful series from start to finish. It's also a show with plenty of thought-provoking imagery too. Whether it be Nate walking fully clothed through a locker room of naked men, or the aforementioned vertically rotating camera movements showing two sides to Jules and Rue's relationship, every scene feels deliberately placed to maximize these ideas. Of course, this value of style won't be for everyone, and in its bid to produce something particularly provocative, Euphoria does lose sight of its bigger picture, with a narrative that doesn't quite hit its peaks as much as it perhaps should. Euphoria isn't perfect, and especially in the teen drama genre there's a lot of competition. However, HBO's latest drama does just enough to stand out, making it one of the more memorable entries this year. Despite the structurally chaotic finale and unanswered questions at the end, there's just enough here to make for a highly enjoyable and provocative series well worth checking out.